Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Recording is in progress. So, as I just said before I hit the record button, I'm so excited to be chatting with you, and thank you so much for sharing your time. So, as I said before, I don't really want to put words in your mouth. So, in your own words, like, who are you, and what continues to drive you to do what you do?
My name is Amy Bush. We met because I do swim run. That's kind of my thing right now. Historically, I'm an adult onset athlete. When I was a kid, I did nothing, and then I one day decided to start swimming and running and biking. And as happens, that turned me into a triathlete. And I ended up doing 8 Ironmans, I guess, before I realized I really don't like riding a bike. Just super awkward when you're doing an Ironman. And so that's when I kind of transitioned to more exclusively running and swimming, and then eventually to swim run.
Okay.
The reason you're talking to me is because I've done a 100-miler. But I think I am pretty much the poster child for the everyday 100-mile runner, if there is such a thing.
Incredible.
If I can do it, anyone can do it.
Well, that gives me a lot of hope and optimism. That's a big reason why. I mean, I wanted to chat with you because you've actually done it, and you not only have done it, but you've been very open about your experience. And I read and I'll share the link in the journal of your very in-depth just rundown of your entire experience. It's
if you
incredible.
Ever wanted to know every second of my 100-mile run, there it is.
I love it. I mean, that helped me so much. And so I thought, like, if I can even get glean just like a fraction of that, from you, but it'd be incredible. So again, incredibly inspired by what you've done, and it kind of reminds me of just like what you just said in your just now, being like, all right, I didn't really do a lot of physical activity growing up, and then now I'm like an incredibly accomplished triathlete, swim runner, did the 100-mile. It's kind of like one of those band documentaries you see. It's like, yeah, we were playing in a garage, and like 2 friends, and then the next scene is like, okay, now we're selling out arenas. Like, what happened? What happened between now and
garages? Like a really fancy garage, maybe.
You put some insulation in there.
Exactly. The neighbors no longer complain.
Well, I mean, but what happened in there? So from going from not doing that much, what was that turning moment for you?
So it probably started with weight, which, most women's journeys to fitness started with problems with their weight. And that it turns out that working out, doing things like 100-milers is never the way to lose weight. That's the way to gain weight. It's very difficult. Like with marathons, a lot of people complain, I started training for a marathon to lose weight, and it didn't work. And at some point you either decide, do I stop doing this because it's not accomplishing my original goal, or do I change my goals? And I changed my goals because I found that I'm not a fast runner, but I love running. And it's funny because I my race report, I journal everything. I think I've logged every workout that I've done since 2007.
Wow. And what was kind of that part of what kind of drove that need to document everything?
That's what I do. I'm an over planner. I'm a documenter. I like writing stuff down. I like data. I always wear my Garmin, and I don't look at it from I'm not meeting my goals. I just look at it from how many miles did I run this year? It's just kind of an interesting data point.
For sure.
And so, yeah, so I started running to try to because at first, as I was going to say, I was really slow at first, and I was really bad at it, and I hated it. And I have all those journals from where I was like, I hate running. Why am I doing this? And then I ended up starting with a group, and I got faster and I got better, and just being able to see those benchmarks, to run a mile 30 seconds faster than I was able to do it a year ago. That feeling of accomplishment was so good. And so even though I'll never be a fast runner, I've really learned to love it.
Yeah. And so going from the point of I hate running, I hate running. Was that moment where you're just like, I love this actually? Was that one of those things that you didn't even realize you enjoyed it as much as you did until
Oh, absolutely.
you're
It's
just
and it's
far
one of those
into
things
it?
where like you get injured or something and it's taken from you and you're like, oh no, I didn't know that I loved this so much until I
Yeah.
couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, no, 100. So on the journey when you were talking about starting out, was that in adulthood or was that in, like
Was that
where
what?
in your life? Was that in adulthood or
Yes.
was that in,
Yes.
okay, got it. And so joining a group was like a big part of that journey.
For sure.
Right.
Like having accountability, having other people to run with, which is kind of ironic because for the past 3 or 4 years, I haven't run with anyone. Part of it was the pandemic, but part of it is just I've lived in Austin my whole life,
Okay.
and slowly everyone else that lives in Austin has moved away. So
Okay.
all of my people that I trained with have all moved away. And
it's so funny because I keep hearing Austin is, a place where everyone just goes to, but it's
well, apparently those people aren't introduced. So even for swim run, Trista and I, we swim run together almost exclusively, and but we never trained together because she lives in Georgia now and I live in Austin. So
got it.
So yeah, almost all of my training is alone.
Wow. Okay. And how has that process been to kind of continue to drive you to in this journey you're continuously on with running and you and Trista are doing so many like just breaking records and doing so many swim runs and doing amazing things in these races. Like you're training remotely with each other. She's in Georgia, you're in Austin. I definitely know that from my experience with Lawrence, but
so you can relate to that.
but it's an interesting thing now since it was such a big moment to like run with people. So how do you kind of continue to find that inspiration training by yourself?
So I think it was during my first half Ironman, and we had a group and everybody needed this group accountability, but over time everybody dropped out. Nobody was as invested, and there were a couple of us who were super invested, and then everybody else like, this turns out to be hard and also involve really early mornings and it's uncomfortable, and so people slowly started dropping out, and I had to make a decision at some point to be like, okay, am I going to do this on my own or am I just not going to do it? And so that was I think that was in 2007, and at that point I said, this is important to me. And so I'm going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to go and swim in the dark at 6 a.m.
Wow.
And that
swimming in the dark, like open water swimming.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Swimming in the dark and open water by yourself. Can you just like, that's such a strong snapshot. How is like, and were you like, even with swimming, like, were you scared of swimming? Did you know how to swim before then? Or?
I did. So I swam when I was a kid. Unfortunately, I swam when I was a kid, stopped for like 30 years, and then came back. And so I have all the muscle memory. I can do butterfly. It's useless in swim run, but I can do it.
You can be the first one to just do butterfly the entire time.
I did a 10K swim. It was a charity swim, and the last probably 25 yards I did butterfly just to see.
Whoa! Yeah, and you did
there.
It's incredible. So, okay, so you've done. I mean, again, such an accomplished athlete now, and all these triathlons. So when did the 100-mile race come into the picture?
I actually know the exact moment that so I have a lot of, when you start doing these things, you fall in with this terrible crowd of people who do these ridiculous things. And you're like, I don't need to do that. That's ridiculous. Yeah. And then over time, you're like, but maybe I could do that. Maybe that's a good idea. And so I knew a lot of people who'd done 100-milers. And I never wanted to do one because for two reasons. One, because I really like sleep. And I'm not fast enough to do a 100-miler without, going into the time that I would normally sleep.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
And I'm really not good at running in the dark. I'm basically, I only have vision in one eye, really. So no depth perception. And running at night is just, the headlamp gives me weird vertigo. And,
interesting.
And so I was like, for those two things, it's just not for me. I'll stick with, I can do a 50-miler and still finish in the light. So that's cool.
Wow.
I can do that.
Yeah.
And then, so I had this period of time where I was training really hard, running with a coach, and I was trying to qualify for Boston. And I got close, and ironically, they changed the Boston qualifying times one year. So they were like, you instead of it being, I think it was supposed to be a 3:45 to qualify for Boston for me, and they changed it that year to a 3:40. And I went out and I ran a 3:43 that year.
Oh.
And I was like, are you kidding me?
Oh my God.
So I would have qualified for Boston had I run that any year in the past, but so I got a little disillusioned with Boston at that point. And like I said, I'm not a fast runner. That's not my strength. I can run for a really long time at a steady pace. My first 50 miler, there was a person who I kept like leapfrogging with because they would run until they were tired and they'd walk. And at that point I would pass them because I was just running slower, but steadilier. And
that's a new word.
By the end, they were like, oh, there's my metronome. And that's kind of how I am. I'm not fast, but I can run consistently slow for a really, really long time. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, well, that actually plays into the 100 miler. I could just keep going for a really long time. And then ended up doing the California International Marathon. One last, hey, let's try for Boston, even though I'm undertrained, and just go out and do it with friends, and got near the wall at mile 20. And I was like, this is miserable. We're off pace. Why am I doing this? I hate marathons. I would rather run a 100 miler super slow than try to run another marathon and qualify for Boston. And, and I was like, okay, maybe I'll try this. And then we did, my husband and I went out and did the Tahoe Triple, which is
what's that?
3 marathons in 3 days.
Oh my God.
And that was kind of just a test to see if I really did like running for a long time. We had a blast. It's such a beautiful course. It circumnavigates Lake Tahoe over 3 days. So each day starts in a different place and eventually the whole way around. And so I was like, okay, I like this. That wasn't officially an ultra, I guess, but I was like, I like ultra running. This is my jam.
This is it. Yeah.
And so at that point, the one of the people who coached us for that, I reached out to him and I'm like, would you be willing to coach me for a 100 miler? And he said, absolutely. And that's how that started.
Wow. Okay. So then the training begins, and then I did write down. So I'm about to write this journal. I'm almost ready to post it, but I mentioned your very encouraging Instagram comment you made, where it's a very diplomatic saying, "Be like, all right, don't be a dum dum. What do you do? Like, you don't do this training without a coach." And so,
well, that's the thing is, I made some notes for myself just in case I wanted to, say any of these things I've learned while training while doing a 100 miler. And note 1 is get a coach. And note 2 is anything I'm about to tell you, ignore if your coach says differently, because your coach gets to decide what's true and what's not.
Yeah, for sure. So during the training, like, what were some of the main things that were like those, like, whoa, like the differences in your training that your coach kind of led you through? What were kind of the things you were really noticing in that process?
So I specifically, when I started working with my coach, said, I want to do it fairly minimally. My body doesn't respond well to really high volume. So I said, I want to do this on as little training as possible while still doing enough to make sure I can do it. So I never did my longest, I don't know what my longest week was mileage wise, but my longest weekend was 20 road miles on Saturday and then 30 trail miles on Sunday. And that was where I peaked. So a lot of people will do a 50 miler, but having done a standalone 50 miler, I know how much that beat up my body and how much recovery time I needed from that. And you can't, I couldn't afford that recovery time when I was needing to be training. So, and that seemed to work for me. Again, your coach will advise you on what you should be doing, but I think especially for you, that's something to think about, coming from starting at such a low level, where to get to what some of these people are doing with 50 milers in training, that's tough on your body.
It is. And I mean, it's throughout this process. I mean, it's all this information about, like, it damages, like it does damage your body.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to be optimistic, there are pieces of things I'm learning about, like, okay, but you do recover for it's temporary pain, but it's still like you're still doing damage. And so the one thing I'm learning just from everybody I chat with, it's more about you will get injured, but it's minimizing the risk of injury. So,
and I actually didn't get injured during training, and I
man,
credit that to
amazing.
the low mileage.
Okay. So keep it low. And when you say minimally, like also in the sense of like, did you also like time commitment wise, or because I know it's like a full-time job.
I mean, I do most of my running in the morning. And so if depending on how long my run is, I just wake up earlier, which sometimes means I wake up literally at 3:00 in the morning to get ready and run.
Okay.
And
so
I combined it into my life.
Yeah.
So
how did you find that balance? Oh, sorry, you're about to say.
Oh, I was just gonna say I live this is all like pre-COVID, relevant things, but I live 7 miles from my workplace. And so sometimes I will take my stuff in the day before and then I'll just run to work and that will be my run for the day. And then, it's 7 miles door to door, but if I need to do a 13-mile run, I'll go out and do a loop in my neighborhood and then run to work.
Sure.
And it just saves me time. It saves me having to then commute to work after doing a run, and I have a shower at work, so I'm super lucky.
Totally.
But that kind of thing, that's how I was able to fit that into my life. I also have a husband who is also an endurance athlete, and so understands all of this, is able to help me train, is able to train with me, take care of the dogs when I need to be gone while they need to be taken care of.
Yeah. So they have and on those but especially on those like long run weekends where you're just like, okay, I'm out for most of the day. I'll see you soon.
Yep.
So again, any like revelations, especially coming from this process, because again, it's this whole piece about of just like once you're just training for like a long distance run and then pushing it even beyond, like 100 miles is a lot. Like I'm still kind of it's like a daily thing where I'm like, okay, I think it's manageable. And then it's like, wait a minute, this is crazy. Like, so, I mean, that daily practice, what kind of also like you got the physical training and what was like the mental training in this process for you?
So, I mean, that's why you go out and do the long runs, sure, you have to get your body used to it. You have to build up the muscles that, you want to build the walking muscles and the running muscles, because I imagine there's very few people who run an entire 100-miler, even a flat one. You're not gonna run that entire time. Yeah. So you need to, and it's a shock to the system if you get out there and you start walking and you haven't trained walking. That uses an entirely different set of muscles and tendons, and
I didn't even think about that just train walking.
Yep.
So would you just sometimes go on like long walks then, or
I usually tried to do stuff that I'm not good at. People will go out and intentionally run walk like 8 and 1 or whatever. I usually just try to let the terrain dictate. So if I get to a hill, I'll walk up the hill. Or I'll, if I'm going to take a gel or something, I'll walk while I do it so that I can. And that's the thing, that's the kind of thing you need to learn to do. And that's one of my pieces of advice is anything that you're going to do it in training. So like, learn to walk, learn to eat while walking, learn to open your gels while running. If you're going to take gels, if you're not going to take gels, figure out what you're going to eat ahead of time. Figure out what's portable, what you can carry with you. And then have a whole list of things you could eat, and then be ready, when you get to the aid station and they have something you've never eaten before and you're like, is this a good idea? It's probably not, but you should do it anyway because you need the calories.
Well, so thinking about that whole process, so like right before, like I'm so excited to kind of get into like the day of the race itself, but before that, like, so all this training. So first, like kind of a couple questions in one, where it's like, how long did you train? And then when did you feel like you were like ready? Like, was there a moment you're like, okay, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready for this. Was there ever a moment like that?
I still don't think I'm ready. I look back now and I'm like, did I really do that? Because it seems impossible.
Yeah.
So I trained for most of a year.
Okay.
And
that's from scratch. Well, that's
I don't ever drop down to scratch. It's terrible. I should probably like detrain sometimes, but I'm pretty much always doing.
Sure.
So I can't speak from scratch.
Mhm.
I'm always usually maintaining like a pretty decent base.
Mhm.
But with intention, I was probably training for about a year.
Okay. Yeah.
And I did a 50K. I was actually just looking at this because it was on like yesterday, several years ago.
Mhm.
And I'd written up a thing about how 50K was so hard. Like it was so
Mhm.
impossible. And if it was that hard to run a 50K, how in the world was I going to go and run
Yeah.
a 100-miler, in 4 months from then?
Mhm.
And I was like, I had to reframe it and say the longest thing I did preparing for this 50K was an 18-mile run. And yet I managed to go out and run 31 miles. And if
Got
you
it.
extrapolate on that, the longest run I'm going to do is 31 miles for this, training. And my coach says that that's enough to get me up to 100 miles on a single day. And so that's a lot of where the coach comes in is,
Mhm.
you have to trust them. You have to trust that they're telling you the right things to do. And that even though it's impossible, that if you follow what they tell you to do, assuming everything goes right and the stars align, you're going to cross the finish line.
Yeah. It's that extra voice of like, okay, this is possible. So,
yeah, I mean, I can tell myself that I can run 300 miles, but that's questionably true. But if you have someone who, granted, you're paying them, so then maybe they're going to tell you whatever you want to hear, but probably they're going to tell you the truth. And if they say you can do it, they know what you're doing, they know what training you've done, they know you. If they think you can do it, then they're probably right.
So thinking about that, like you've had you have this amazing training experience with your coach. I'm sorry, and what was your coach's name? How did you know them?
So Russ Secker, he is a he's a stage runner. So he will go run across France, why not?
Casual, just a casual outing.
Yeah, and that's actually something. That's the Tahoe Triple was basically a stage race of that sort, and that sounds so amazing. Like you just you run until you get to a checkpoint, and then you go crash for the night, and you wake up the next morning, and you and a bunch of people just head out into the wild again to run to the next checkpoint. So something to consider after you do your 100.
So, well, your 100. What was that day like? Like, how did you go about it? Because it's interesting. Different people have approached it differently. So, like the first person, Kevin, I chatted with, he did his 100 and he just chose a place. He just did a loop around a huge park. Just kept doing it over and over again. That's why it was local. It's close to him. All of his friends were there. That was supporting him in different stages. And then some people just do it just like, I'm going from town, like this village to this village way down the road. So how did you approach it?
So I did a local race here in Texas. It was previously a 5 20-mile loops course. And then one of the hurricanes, Harvey or something, came through and kind of destroyed the park. And so they had to do a lot of work to the park, and they changed it to a 4 25-mile loops race. I probably should have known better because I don't like loops. I like, point to point, preferably, where everything's new every time, or at least an out and back where you only have to see things twice. And when you see them the second time, it's the last time. But this was 4 25-mile loops, and that'll mess with your head.
Sure. Well, so we'll go more into that. So what was like the setup like that? Where were you at? Like where you're, going through all of this?
When you're doing any run of any length, it's according to how long it is. Like part of the way through, you're like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? It seems so long. Because you're kind of basing how you feel on the total length. So if you're running a 5K, you get like a quarter of a mile in, you're like, oh shit, what have I gotten myself into? When you're doing a marathon, you get there at like maybe mile 13, all of a sudden you realize I got there at like mile 17 of 100. I was like, oh no, what have I gotten myself into? This is already so impossible.
Oh wow.
And I'm only at mile 17. And there was this one out and back section that was just like there was nothing in there. There was no way for people to get there. So there was no one cheering. There was nothing to see. In general, Texas doesn't have the most scenic trails.
Okay.
And this one in particular, and this section of this one in particular was very boring.
Mhm.
And I eventually got to the point where I was like, not only do I have to do this again and again, but then I have to do it in the dark. And then I have to do it again somehow.
Oh my
And so I had some trouble early on
Mhm.
wrapping my head around what I had signed up for.
So so you had those moments, and how did you get through those?
So, I mean, you have to prepare for that. You have to spend some time ahead of time, now deciding why you're doing this.
Yes.
Because if you get out there and, a lot of people don't finish their first 100, and sometimes it's physical. Sometimes, you turn an ankle or things go wrong or you can't eat anymore and you just completely bonk.
Mhm.
But sometimes you get out there and it's gonna get hard. It's gonna
Mhm.
get really, really hard. And at that point, you have to say, why am I doing this? And
Yes.
if you don't have a compelling reason, then you're going to be like, this is stupid. There's no reason I'm doing this. I could just stop right now.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so you have to come up with an answer. And I didn't even really have a great answer other than I know a lot of people I know I'm doing this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shame is a very, very motivating
Yes.
thing.
Yeah. I'm already anticipating a lot of that.
And I did all of this training and I'm already out here. And if I care about this, which I do, I want to do a 100-miler,
Mhm.
I'd have to start all over. Like, I'd have to do all of this again. And if I'm never going to do it again, then I want this to be it. I want to go ahead and do it.
Mhm.
And I actually got to, when I was finishing up my third loop, so I was almost at 75 miles, I had
Wow.
I've never run 75 miles before. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that
Mhm.
will, scratch that itch and I can be satisfied. And I was like, no, I've made it this far. If I have to, I know a lot of people who will walk, 20 miles of the thing.
Mhm.
And that sounded terrible to me. And I was like, I'm going to finish this, even if I have to walk, but I really don't want to have to walk this.
Of course.
I did end up walking a lot more than I wanted to
Mhm.
on the overnight part because
Mhm.
it was just with, the headlamp and vision, and the park I was running in is famous for having a lot of roots,
Okay.
which you can't see at night. Also,
Mhm.
it rained, which meant the trail
Oh.
was super muddy.
Yeah.
And I was surprised because for all the roots, I was expecting to trip multiple times. And I caught my
Mhm.
toe a couple times, but never went down. The only time I fell was when I stepped into a mud slick that we couldn't see. And my feet just it was like a, comedy act. My feet just came out from under me and I landed. I'm sitting there in the dark,
Mhm.
with my hands just sunk into the mud.
Mhm.
And I'm like, this is
my
is
God.
life right here.
This is what I do for fun.
I have made choices that have brought me to this point in my life.
willingly. Wow. Okay. So you're obviously going through the dark in the mud, and so going through even logistics. Did people run with you? Did you have pacers? Did you have?
So I did. I had because it was a 4-loop course. My crew. I had my husband and then 2 or 3 friends that kind of
Mhm.
went in and out during the day, and they just stayed at the start finish line. And
Mhm.
each time I come through, they'd help me. We'd planned ahead of time, like these are the things that I might want.
Yep.
And so every time I came through, they'd offer me food,
Mhm.
and I would decide what felt good. So I spent most of the loop trying to figure out what I wanted at the end of that loop.
Yeah.
And then I had 3 different pacers, and it depends entirely on what kind of person you are. I know a lot of people
Sure.
want to go out and do their 100-miler just by themselves. They want it to be a Zen experience and they just want it to be them. That's not me. I wanted
I'm more
to
on
have
that side.
people with me whenever
Yeah.
I could. So we were allowed to have a pacer for loops 3 and 4.
Okay.
So for the last 50 miles, and I picked up a pacer at mile 50, and had, like I said, 3 different pacers over the course of that.
Mhm.
And it made such a difference.
Okay.
Although it's kind of funny because you spend 50 miles. I mean, I didn't end up running with anyone during the first 50 miles. So I would see other runners out there. It was
Mhm.
out and back 25 miles. So you saw everyone out there a billion times.
Sure.
And every time you'd pass someone, you'd both be like, good job, you're doing great.
Mhm.
And so for 50 miles, all I said was, good job, you're doing great. And so suddenly 50 miles in, I'm exhausted, but also feral. Like I hadn't spoken a true sentence in 50 miles. So it was really weird suddenly having a pacer and having to hold a conversation.
Yeah.
I don't think I was the best conversationalist during the last 50 miles of that
No,
race.
I think, well, that's something you learn about, especially like that. There's a special and specific silence that happens, right? It's like understood. You're like, no, I know what's happening, and I'm here for it.
So I would recommend, if you're the kind of person who likes running with people or likes having company, I would recommend pacers, because I didn't use mine as most people traditionally do. I think that most people needs a pacer to keep them going, to you motivate them. I was completely self-motivated. I didn't have that problem, but I just needed, I needed light. Because having a second headlamp was such a game changer for me in the dark.
Yeah.
And I just needed someone to take me out of my own head.
Sure.
To just talk.
And what were some of the things? Was it just kind of just like, let's just like small chats, like small talk, or
so my first pacer was my original running coach that coached me through all of my Boston attempts. And she and I just go way back. So we just talked about, it was actually kind of one of her first trail races and her first trail run in the dark.
Wow. Okay.
So, I kind of got to coach her through that a little bit.
That's special. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I do. That's one of the pieces I really enjoy, where I think it was, when I trained, because I started running right before, no, actually, I think it was, well, I was starting to train for my marathon, and then the pandemic happened. So I just continued the training for the marathon. So I did a solo marathon, but friends I was running with, it ended up being, a person I would run with a lot. It was, in his process, he was like, when he joined me on a leg of the marathon that I was doing, he was like, this is the longest I've ever run. So like, it's really cool to experience a lot of those moments with other people.
Yeah, and have it be special for them too.
Yeah. And you realize what you're doing ends up kind of, things orbit around it as like a thing special for other people too.
So my second pacer, I went the complete opposite tact, which is a friend who I'd never really spent a lot of time with. So we were Facebook friends. We, see each other in passing at races, but we'd never really talked deeply, which means that, I was with her for at least 30 miles, I think.
Wow. Yeah, you get to know someone.
Yeah. And we had plenty to talk about because we really didn't know that much about each other.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
What was funny is that also gave me the opportunity. So she gave me a lot of funny stories. She tried to, find like the like college stories that were embarrassing and, how she got her nickname and stuff like that. And, my last pacer was my husband. And that was kind of the plan from the beginning. That's it can go either way, to have your spouse pace you. Some people's relationships work better if their spouse doesn't pace them. But we have a really solid relationship. We've run together a lot. And I knew that I wanted him to be there at the end with me. And
makes sense.
But on the other hand, like he told me some of the stuff that had happened, during the first 75 miles of the race, but we don't have a lot to talk about otherwise because we talk every day, we told all the stories. So I ended up like telling the stories from my second pacer. I'm like, hey, let me tell you about Melissa's story. I'm like, well, this is weird, but somehow it worked.
Yeah. Oh my God. So you finished it, and it's again, an incredible feat. Like I can't even, still trying to wrap my head around it. So you finished with your husband. Like, what was that feeling once the moment, you stepped across the finish line?
So it actually didn't end up that I finished with my husband. This is one of the things you learn in running 100 miles. Nothing ever goes exactly as you planned. Sure. You just kind of roll with it. He had injured himself a little bit and he didn't tell me, but he managed to let the rest of our crew know. And so at the last aid station, as we were coming in, he swapped out with my second pacer and she ran me in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
double duty.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. So, but then it's true. Like, I guess like once you're out there, you just have to try to adapt to the situation, what's going on.
Yep. So, and that's, having a crew that can sort all of that out. And I didn't even know what was going on. And,
sure.
A lot of people hide stuff from you while you're doing an endurance event like that. They're just like, everything's sunshine and rainbows. Okay. Don't worry about anything that's going on.
Don't look behind the curtain.
Exactly.
It's good.
They're like, you just
Oh.
do your thing. You just keep moving forward.
I guess you're just in that zone.
Yep.
So when you do though cross the finish line, what is that like? Is it even possible to express that into like words? That feeling?
It's not.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
for sure.
was, you know, I can't remember if I cried or not because I think I was just so done.
Yeah.
Hello, Greyhound here.
Oh.
I, at some point during my last loop, so my first two loops, I was probably on pace to go a 24-hour
Wow.
100 miler. And I hadn't ever looked at times other than I had to come in under 30 hours. That was the time cutoff for this race. And so when I look at my times now, my first two loops were at if I had maintained that pace, I would have come in at around 24 hours. And that was not at all my goal.
Yeah.
But then night hits and everything changes.
Sure.
And I just figured everyone was paying attention to my time. And if anything was problematic, they would let me know and I would just continue doing my thing.
Sure.
Sometime during the fourth loop, another runner said something about, I think we're going to make it to that aid station before the time cut off. And I was like, oh shit.
Wow.
Like, is that a thing? Is that a thing that I need to be worrying about?
Yeah.
And it became obvious that like, if I continued at the pace I was at, it might not be a foregone conclusion that I was going to finish in 30 hours. And so, and I don't even know at this point, like trying to do the math now, I don't even know if that was true or if that's one of my biggest pieces of advice. Don't try to do math during 100 miler. Like have other people do math for you.
You'll go crazy.
You will do it wrong and you will panic.
Yeah.
But that scared me, put fear of God into me right there. And I started running and I started, I say running, but it felt like I was sprinting, but I was probably doing like a 15-minute mile or something. Sure. But I ran the whole way in. Like I didn't stop at all. Wow. I was just so scared that after all that I wasn't going to make the time cutoff.
Yeah.
I knew at that point I was going to finish, but I was like, I have to finish under 30 hours. This has to, be official.
For sure.
And I ended up, I think coming in at 29, I don't even remember. I had, I think at least 30 or 40 minutes before the time cutoff.
That's amazing. God, that's amazing.
But it's just, that's how much things can change, when you're feeling so good and then things just fall apart or you just stop paying attention,
Yeah. Well, because it becomes like one foot in front of the other moment. You're like, okay, this is all I can think about right now.
I will tell you though, a lot of people told me it will get really, really hard, especially in the middle of the night. It will get really hard, but things will change when the sun comes up. Okay. And in the middle of the night, it feels like the sun will never come up. Like you're just like, this is my life now. I just run in the dark forever, and this I will just die out here.
There's something very like metaphorical about that, just in life in general. It's just like, oh, you can't see it, and then it does get better.
But it's so true. The sun came up, and I was just like, it's literally a whole new day, but also figuratively a whole new day. Like it. You could see again, you can run without fearing for tripping over something. That's when the weird, I wouldn't say I ever hallucinated, but that's when the weird visual effects started for me. Like, I'd look up ahead and I'd be like, there's a person standing on the side of the trail. And then we get up there and it's a tree. And I was convinced that it was a person,
Wow. Okay.
And I was like, this is what I wanted out of the 100 miler. I want the weird brain games and the.
So we're like, even on that level, where there, like, what was like a truly bizarre moment that happened on the, like you're out there, it's like you're in the mud, you're just like.
Let's see, truly weird moment. I mean, there were things like I had some friends who there was an aid station that was out in the middle of nowhere. And it was just, it was like so remote that it was just water and maybe electrolytes, but they didn't even take food out there because it was just too remote. And so, and that's during the out and back that's just so hard mentally. And I got out there and it was raining and it was just, I was like, this is so terrible. And all of a sudden I hear cheering and I'm like, what idiots are out here cheering in the middle of nowhere? Like, and then I see them. And so it was my birthday. I forgot to mention
Oh,
that part. That
okay.
was what I decided to do for my birthday, was to go run 100 miles.
That's a pretty
And
big element to all this.
and I had some friends who came out, who like they were just went out to camp and then to cheer for me and anyone else who was doing it. And so they kept being all over the course with balloons and stuff. And I heard the people cheering, and I got up to them like, "Who are those idiots?" And I'm like, "Oh, those are my idiots. Those are my idiots right there." And it's just amazing how much that can pull
it's
you out of
amazing.
your own head, you know, and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
for even a few seconds, just make things good again.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. So thinking out of respect of, the time you're graciously sharing today, I just want to kind of think about like a couple last kind of things I was thinking about, like after the experience, like again, like after the swim run felt, changed, and there's parts of me that didn't change, and there are parts of me that like you can't help but being changed through an experience like this. But and I'm using swim run or the marathon I did, but looking at something like this, like in what ways do you think you've been changed from this? Like anything from the day to day to how you approach things in life, or how do you feel like you've been impacted?
I mean, part of it is I will never say never. This was something that felt so impossible. And like I said, I think on some level, it still feels impossible. It doesn't feel like I did it. It feels like, I couldn't do that because I'm not capable of doing something like that. And then I have to go back and look at the finish line pictures and be like, no, I did that. Like, if I decide to do something, I can do it.
Yeah.
And, we're utilizing that in swim run too. Like, Orcas Island, like that, looking at that course, that looks impossible,
Yeah.
and Trista and I are not, again, the fastest athletes. We're having the most fun and we're steady, but we're not winning. And but to know that you can go out there, and if you just keep going, that you're going to finish, that's proved to me that whatever ridiculous bullshit I can come up with, I can do it if I just do it right. Don't throw yourself into it stupidly, but plan and get a coach and do it right, and you can do anything.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
As a female, as a 5 foot tall female who is often underestimated, it's nice to buck people's expectations and to be like, you didn't expect much from me, but look what I can do.
Yeah. Well, I imagine also like as that element to it, do you find that again, going into the swim run community or these like athletic communities, like it's everyone's so welcoming. I especially found that in this, because I feel like people are approaching it in a different way of like less about time and more about the experience. However, do you find that as a woman coming into this world, like into this like realm, like do you find that has it felt like a bit of a boys club? Has it felt like, do you feel like you've had to kind of overcome more?
Not at all with swim run.
Okay.
Swim run has been amazing. I definitely felt that in triathlon. And the numbers back that up, and swim run has just been, and we're actively trying to foster that too through Wild Swim Run, more women and kids into the sport. And it's just been so welcoming. And there's been like Herbert Crable has tried to really open slots for women and get women into there, trying to make it at least 50-50, maybe even more women than men. And so, yeah, swim run has been amazing for that. It's been so empowering for women. And that's something that it's just so different from triathlon, in addition to not wanting to ride a bike anymore. So that's why I left triathlon originally. But the attitude, like you say, is just so different. It just feels like a family. And I'm hoping that it doesn't lose that as it gets bigger. Hopefully it gets bigger. But yeah, just everyone out there, like I literally, when we did our first swim run at Lake James, I was trying to climb up a embankment to get out of the water. And the people behind us was a mixed team, and the guy, really tall guy. And I was like struggling up there. He basically grabbed me by the waist and just put me up there. And I'm like, I'm your competition, not directly because he was a mixed team, but like there was no reason for him to do that other than he's like, here, let me make your life a little easier. And one team will climb up and turn around to the next team and give them a hand up. And it's beautiful. It's just a beautiful sport.
It is a beautiful sport, and I mean, I definitely drank the Kool-Aid, and everyone, I've annoyed all of my friends about it. But it's like, but thinking about the thought of just like making it more accessible for younger people, like, because finding that access to kind of like athletics and access to a lot of that role, especially earlier in our lives, like I feel like is so important to kind of help us kind of propel us in that moment, but. And especially to also really nurture more of a diverse community of people that don't rightly have access to that. So thinking about like, what do you think would be a good way? Or, I mean, I know the programs you're in are actively doing this, but like, what's the biggest thing that you could really say is like a big contributing factor to getting more people? Or
I think probably, I mean, the partner aspect is very helpful because, you need, not all races require a partner, but it's so much more fun with it. And to reach out to someone who hasn't done this before and say, will you partner with me? That, because when you reach out to someone and say, do you want to do triathlon? When they do the triathlon, they're going to be out there on their own. It's such an everyman for himself. But swim run, if you invite someone to come be your partner, you're their support the entire time. So they're never going to be out there alone. So I think that probably, and Tristan and I aren't doing a great job of this as a team. She is going out and intentionally trying to find women who've never done swim run before and partner with them. And so that I think is a big one. Also trying to, I do the race reports I write, trying to catch people's interests, the videos that they put out. We just did Swim Run NC, and the video from that just shows how beautiful it is and how ridiculous it is, shows that it's not triathlon without the bike as you're climbing up a waterfall and
of course. No, I mean, and again, it's incredible work that you and Trista are doing, and it's really one of the most impactful. I guess I am speaking for Lawrence because he has explicitly said it many times, but just how one of the best things was like chatting with both you and Krista during, and how welcoming you were into it, and just it really did feel incredibly approachable, incredibly just warm, and in a very genuine way. I think so. And thinking it though, like kind of bouncing into like my own experience after that, it's kind of going off a little bit, but it was like. So we had spent like 2 years pretty much preparing for this because it was postponed from the pandemic, the swim run. And then it ended up being pretty much almost 2 years until we did it. So it was a lot of buildup. And then after it, I admit,
depression.
Yes. And so thinking about the swim run and thinking about your, 100-mile run, it's just like it's your identity. And it's kind of like it's your identity, but also like a lifestyle shift, but it is very goal oriented. So how do you sustain that level of those peaks and valleys from all of it?
So post 100-miler is a little bit easier to relax after because I don't know about everyone, but I was pretty crippled afterward. I wasn't injured, but I really thought for a while that maybe my feet no longer functioned. Like I've never had my feet hurt in this particular way until after this 100-miler. And I was like, wow, I mean, I guess I was on my feet for almost 30 hours nonstop, and it was wet. And, it taxed I think my foot bones, the inside of my foot matter in a way that had never been taxed before. And it was pissed. So it was a while before, I could walk normally, certainly a while before I could run. So, you can't, a lot of times your urge is to just jump right back in, and you can't do that after a 100-miler. You have to rest after a 100-miler. Swimming's good, but even swimming, like pushing off the wall for a while was a little iffy. So it's a mixed bag, because during the race you tell yourself, okay, just finish this 100 miles, and if you don't want to run again ever, you don't have to. You make yourself promises that to get you through the race, and when you finish, you have to make that decision. I think some people do quit. I think some people are like, that was the pinnacle, and it was miserable, and I never want to do it again. And, if you ask someone during a 100-miler, will you ever do another one? Almost everyone's going to say, fuck no. Why would I do that? You ask them at the finish line right afterwards, and they're like, oh, maybe.
Maybe.
And you ask them, a week later, and they're like, yes, because I missed that high. I missed
Sure.
that. The training was amazing.
Mhm.
The finish line was amazing, and you forget all of the pain.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that the postpartum depression is pretty high. The harder
Yeah.
the race, the higher the depression afterward.
Okay.
Which is
Okay.
how people get caught into a spiral of, I keep doing this dumb stuff over and over. But 100 is a little different. I haven't done another one since then. When I finished, I said, I'm not going to say that I won't do it again, but I don't think I would do this course again. I wouldn't do a looped course like that. It was just it was too hard mentally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so at this point, which is years later, I would certainly do another one. I'm a little intimidated by doing the training again because it is a big commitment. But I'm definitely back to, I want that feeling again. I want that feeling of accomplishment. I want that feeling of just being, feeling so limitless.
Limitless. Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you. I mean, your wealth of knowledge has been so amazing just to be around. So thank you again for everything.
Learn to poop in the woods.
Oh, learn to poop in the woods. Okay.
That's very important.
If I could take one thing away, learn to poop in the woods. Well, I will definitely be picking your brain more down the road for sure.
Absolutely.
But
I can't wait to follow along.
Oh my God. Me crumbling along. But well, thank you so much, Amy. I again appreciate everything, and I'm excited to see you on the trail soon. The next swim run.
Do another swim run. Yep.
Oh, 100%. 100%. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.